The former CEO of Rupert Murdoch's British newspaper operation has been arrested by police investigating allegations of phone hacking and bribery. Rebecca Brooks is the 10th person to be detained in connection with the scandal that's engulfed the now defunct News of the World. Well, for more on these latest developments, let's now talk to Annie Mashen. She's a former intelligence officer for MI5, joining us there in London. So, what's your reaction to this arrest, bearing in mind that Rebecca Brooks is so close to the Prime Minister and other high-level politicians?
Well, absolutely. It's very unusual to have someone this close to the heart of power in the UK being arrested. But I suppose based on the prima facie evidence around this case, it would be unavoidable for the police not to arrest her. Having said that, of course, it is a very long journey from arrest to being charged, to being put on trial and to being convicted. So I suppose I'd be more surprised if she were charged and if this does proceed towards a legal hearing. I have to say, though, I think it's the timing of this arrest is very interesting because it's highly, highly unusual for someone to be a pre-arranged arrest to turn themselves into a police station and go through the formal arrest process on a Sunday. And of course it is just 2 days before she was due to appear before the Parliamentary Committee. So now she's got a sort of get out of jail free card. I can't possibly talk about this, it's subject to legal proceedings. So in a way, I suppose if one has a slightly suspicious turn of mind, one might think that the police, by taking this step at this stage, are allowing her little wriggle room where she won't have to say too much and perhaps also won't have to say too much about her links with the police service in London as well. So it's very, very interesting timing.
Interesting, that word wriggle. What about the police themselves? Are they wriggling here? An assistant editor of The Guardian today has been saying that he believes this arrest is an attempt by the police to actually deflect attention away from themselves.
Well, quite possibly, yes. I mean, the amount of information that has emerged about the interlinkage between News International and the police, I mean, it's amazing that the focus has tended to be on the journalists themselves and not on the allegedly corrupt police officers who have been receiving money to provide protected information. And of course, it's not just about the phone hacking scandal. There are other practices they appear to have been implicated in, such as the technique known as pinging, where you triangulate someone's location using their mobile phones. Now, the only people who really have access to that sort of information would be vetted police officers working for the counter-terrorism branch or for a special branch, or potentially, of course, the spies. So who, where and when all this was going on is a very interesting question, but it does show that there's a sort of endemic corruption and a failure of accountability and oversight as well within the police force.
So therefore, if the police, as you say, are accountable in all of this, in these practices, and also bearing in mind they failed to properly investigate this in the past, do you believe that this time, if an investigation is carried out, and indeed there are talks of investigations of the police themselves, though, do you think that these investigations by the police themselves will have any effect? I mean, are you hopeful that it'll be done in a proper way?
Well, I think one always has to remain hopeful and optimistic in a democracy, but really they need to bring in someone from a different force. You can't have the guards investigating themselves. It's the old quote of who guards the guards. So I think there is an issue here, and it needs to be done incredibly carefully and incredibly transparently in order to regain trust. But there will be pressure, of course, because there's been such a media storm around this issue, for a proper investigation into this. And I think as well it's sort of revealed the dark corners of the British establishment, the sort of trickle-down corruption almost, because we have a sort of hierarchy of intelligence in this country where you have the official spy agencies like MI5, MI6 and GCHQ with very little meaningful oversight. Then you have the secret police and the police forces which have slightly more oversight. You have the mercenary intelligence services as well, you have companies like Kroll or Diligence or Aegis, which are pretty much unaccountable. And then of course you have the private investigators who appear to have been doing the bulk of the work for the journalists. And I think there's just this sort of trickle-down effect of secrecy and lack of accountability and potentially corruption that sort of pervades every layer of this intelligence infrastructure in this country. And I really do think we need to sweep out the Augean stables and put the whole of the house in order to change that sort of culture of cover-up and getting away with it.
But is it not justifiable if these private investigators are working for journalists, for newspapers, and it is in the public interest? Why should government agencies be able to do all this sort of spying and hacking into phones and not those investigators who are doing it in the public's interest?
Well, that's a very good question, and it's funny that there's so much righteous indignation from the MPs about this phone hacking business because, of course, they could potentially have been the targets, whereas they don't seem to have the same sort of righteous indignation about mistakes made by the spies in their official bugging operations. There was a report recently, the official annual report by the Interception Commissioner, Sir Paul Kennedy, and he said that MI5 had made 1,061 mistakes in their applications to the Home Secretary for bugging and intercept information in the last year. And yet this just went under the radar. You know, there was no outcry in the press, there was no outcry from the MPs. And yet I think this is actually much more serious because, of course, you have the spies aggressively invading people's privacy and investigating them. There does need to be meaningful oversight. So, as I said, it's a sort of systemic lack of accountability and potentially systemic corruption. And we need to set our house in order from the top down.
Annie, very interesting to hear what you have to say. Thanks so much for joining us live there in London. Annie Mashon, former intelligence officer for MI5.